Okie doke. So let's get started. Before I hit on some of the items that I researched this week, anybody have anything interesting or of note that they want to bring up either now or after we touch on some
Go ahead,
things?
maybe in a little.
You've got something, Siggy?
Well, yeah, a little side story maybe, but not too far from my house, my friend has a farm, and we just turned on a 70 kilowatt ground mount system Saturday it was, and it produced perfectly fine. It was a little bit of a struggle to get the utility out there to hook it up. They took their time, and it seemed to be a little bit of a delay tactics there or something. But finally, he got his new transformer. He got his barn hooked up. And the only thing that was missing was, and this is actually the interesting part, the only thing that was missing was a proper load for 70 kilowatt, because TECO down here doesn't really give you a lot of money for surplus energy, maybe 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour or something like that.
Oh, okay.
So we were looking for loads, and about 3 months ago, we were starting to think, well, we don't have any loads. We could do some crypto mining. So we've added.
That's what I thought. That's good.
Yeah, we've added a container full of servers now. Quite an investment actually, and it's working. So we're using solar power to consume the energy there. We're probably using maybe 2/3 of the energy right now.
Really? Have you
Okay,
gotten
you are
any?
doing that?
Have you gotten any Bitcoin yet?
No, we're mining Ethereum. So it's
Oh.
the second most popular crypto. I'm not saying you should do that, but so far it seems to be very profitable. But
What did you have to do to? What did you have to do to set that up? Because I'm not kidding. I said this about a month ago when I started seeing how much I was generating from a 50-some kilowatt system.
Well, a typical server with 8 GPUs draws about 1 kilowatt, but it draws it for 24 hours. So your solar system is only producing for about 5 hours. So
I got a big battery bank.
With 70 kilowatt, we can probably power 12 to 14 of these servers.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's at the moment, it seems very attractive to do, but things change so quickly, so it could be a dead end soon. We don't know.
This sounds like a little solar Breaking Bad here. We've got a college professor, doing cryptocurrency off of bootleg solar here.
Yeah.
Have you looked into using it as heating?
Well, the heat load is very bad for us, because we had to we put all those in a refrigerated trailer, and we have to remove the heat load, and the heat is about as much as the draw on electricity, I would think, and so we have to move quite a bit of air. So the whole thing is energy intense.
Well, it seems like there's a great opportunity. Like the only ethical way I would be able to mine is if I turn it into my home heating system.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Just a cogen kind of situation. You're taking the heat. Of course, he's down in Tampa, where that's not
right.
The heat is not such a big deal.
No, we have the problem getting rid of the heat. So there is no pool. Otherwise, we could have dumped it in the pool. But no, we don't have that there.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit about the inverters for that very large system? That's probably 280 panels.
Yeah, 285, I believe. It's 345 watt panels. There's about 82 kilowatt DC on that system, and 7 times 10 kilowatt grow watt inverters. I think they're from China. Surprisingly, they work very efficient and very well. I was very pleased when the system came on. They were actually clipping a little bit. They were right there on top of things.
Really? So
all of them are in parallel. That is, you have X amount of panels serving, and no problem there, right?
No, they all go on a 400 amp load panel. They are being collected there, and then they go on there. He installed. My friend is an idealist, so we didn't do that with the purpose of mining. We did it. He did it because I don't know. I don't really know the reason, because he wanted it. But he installed a new 400 amp service. At 240 volts.
Do you have a sense of
Probably
what the
violating the 120% rule?
Well, it sounds like he
Oh,
put in his own panel.
There's no 20% rule. We are there's no 20% rule. We're on the line side,
Oh,
so we're not backfeeding through anything.
Yeah, there's
And it's,
nothing. Yeah, you're just using your service panel that you said was 400 amps, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're fine. It's just not an existing system. Do you know what the cost per watt was on this system roughly?
Oh, he bought those panels from an auction in Arizona. It must have been an insurance claim because he is in insurances, and he bought them for like 22 cents a watt. And the inverters are cheap from China, and they might have been in $1,500 a piece or something. I think he's under $2, $1.50, between $1.50 and $2, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
It's not done by a contractor. It's like kind of like homemade.
Yeah, and when you talk about insurance, I would assume there are kind of two different sources for that. One is if there's a fire somewhere, they typically will take all of the array off, even if it's not damaged, and replace it. But it may be a business that went under or something, or a bankruptcy sale or liquidation sale or something.
They all had Arizona dust on it. I can tell you that.
Okay.
Desert or something. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But yeah, the purpose was not mining. The purpose was finding loads later, but he wanted the install, he wanted the tax credit, and he wanted to spend the money.
Okay. Well, that's pretty cool. Okay. Well, let me touch on a couple of things here. Just localized news. I see that just looking at the crowd, it's not so much localized because I think I'm the only one except for Tim who's in Ohio. Anyway, I saw a recent announcement from Pennsylvania, which I thought was pretty startling. The Pennsylvania state government just announced they're going to get 50% of the state government power from solar. So that's an initiative that they're pushing. 2023. So that's, who knows how big that is. I mean, usually government's a pretty big supplier. So it's like we've talked about before, or not supplier, but a consumer of energy. So we've talked about this before, like when a company like Apple or Microsoft says we're going to get X number of percent from solar or renewables, that tends to push the market. Well, here now governments are sort of stepping in saying, hey, we're consumers too. So we're going to pull some of that. I was hoping that Bob would be on since he's from Illinois, because on the other side of us here, there's a initiative starting up in Illinois called the Downstate Clean Energy Affordability. Speak of Bob, and here he shows up. So I'll hold on that for just 1 second. Bob, I was just talking about you, but there's an initiative in Illinois called the Downstate Clean Energy Affordability Act. And this is a brand new thing that's just come out. Seems to be that they're trying to push. I mean, it was pretty vague, the details that I saw. It said, increase the use of clean energy, jumpstart the EV, and keep energy affordable in the downstate region. So, the skeptical part of me thought this is an act that basically is seeking to take credit for things that are going to happen anyway. It's like we can all pat ourselves on the back and say, see, it's because of my bill that people started driving electric cars, even though they were going to do it anyway, that kind of stuff. So I don't know, but I just found it interesting. The state governments and Pennsylvania and Illinois are not exactly renowned for being first adopters. So they're jumping on board with some green initiatives. Maybe it's in advance of the Biden stuff, hoping to get things ready for federal money. Who knows?
There's a couple of things that hit the legislator. Nothing affirmative yet, but it hit the legislator. And I also know that your RECs, they pay more for RECs downstate than they do in Chicago because the cost of electricity downstate is a lot more than it is in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
So it's a financial target in a way.
Yeah, it also sounded like when I was looking at this article, like there was some repressive legislation going through the state legislature, and this was seeking to kind of counteract it. But I may be just reading into that. It's sort of like what we're seeing here in Ohio, where there's one bill that encourages solar and another bill that discourages solar. So
Well, the next thing you're going to tell me is that people in Edison is paying off our council members downstate Illinois.
no, that's for the Ohio legislature and First Union. I think they have the monopoly on paying off legislators. So
2 people went to jail for that already last year.
really, yeah.
And the number 1 legislator, Manigan, has stepped down from his seat. They took it down. Of course, California's no better. They're doing the same thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how that pushback seems to come about. And I've always maintained that the solar industry needs to be better at buying off state legislators. That's where we're really lagging the fossil fuel industry. We need to hire our own corrupt officials instead of relying on the already corrupt ones.
If I was mayor of Chicago, I would teach the gangbangers how to shoot. Because they're missing everybody, hitting children, passerbys, and stuff like that all the time.
Yeah.
And they're not hitting their target to hell. If they died, then what the heck,
Okay, well, we may be getting off topic there, Bob.
Yeah, but I do have a topic when you get it. I do have a topic.
Okay. All right. Well, let me just finish these little items and then we'll jump back to you. And I've got one that I thought it would be fun to discuss, just in general. But there's another thing. I think this is kind of a mega trend that's just starting. But I saw an announcement that SunPower is now, and they're an inverter manufacturer, but they're providing money for installing your solar. So basically what they're doing is if you use their inverters, they will finance your entire system at less than 1% interest on a 15-year loan. So that's interesting that I think we'll begin to see a lot of the vendors start to provide money. Yeah.
Did you say less than what? You broke up a little bit right at the punchline.
Yeah, it's less than 1% interest rate for 15 years. It's 0.99% for 15-year loan. So, that's kind of a one-stop shopping. You go in, you buy your product, they finance it, you're paying them off at a rate cheaper than what your electric bill would be. That's gonna jumpstart quite a lot of activity. I know in Ohio, there's already a program that if you finance, I know KeyBank will do it for you automatically, but the state will subsidize 3% of the interest rate on a loan for installing solar. So that may be replicated in other states. I don't know, but it does definitely exist here in Ohio. Another interesting project, which again could be replicated throughout Appalachia for sure. Maryland just announced they're going to put in a 175 megawatt solar array on former coal mine land. So that's good in that the coal mine regions, even though they claim to reclaim them, they can't really, once the land has been strip mined, it really is not able to be reclaimed. We see that here locally where I live. There's a big project called the Wilds, which is like they've recreated the Serengeti Plain out on an old strip mine here, and it's a big tourist attraction. But what's interesting is this has been 40 years now, I guess, since they strip mined, and no trees will grow there. You get grasslands, but there's just something in the subsoil, something in the root structure, whatever it is, they just can't get trees to grow. The pH, you think? Yeah, I don't know. I believe you. It's just, so you see this kind of brownfield to green field, so to speak. It's perfect location, old coal mines for solar, because there is infrastructure there, roadways and the like that they created. It's also, a good use for the property. Often there are transmission lines that are nearby because of the industrialized activity that happened there. So So that's an interesting option. Who knows if anybody will take it up. So those were some of the little bits. So let's see, who had the item you wanted to bring up? Bob, you said you had something?
Yes, my hands are tied to go door to door here, or go to libraries or anything else to get the word out for solar. And I, having worked in industry in the area here for a long time, all these places have this one woman, it's always a woman, that that are gatekeepers, to keep a salesman away from the boss, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And they can vary to be very mean people, I'll tell you. And I can see myself knocking on the door of one of these industrial places and hand out my information, and they call up the ICC saying, you know, you got this guy Bob Sims out here breaking the rules of COVID-19. And I can tell you the ICC asks me every year who has complained about me, and they want a complete write-up.
Oh, really?
And I said, nobody except my wife. That doesn't count. So I can lose my ticket in a second.
Yeah, well, I think it's best to comply with those kind of regulations, whether you agree with them or not, for sure.
But I can call up the owners. They have this thing called LinkedIn. You ever see that LinkedIn thing?
Yeah. It's basic. I was going to tell a bad joke about it. Yeah. I censored
like
myself.
Don't do that. I don't. Why should you? Anyway, so LinkedIn will always tell you who the owners is, so you can call them up.
Uh-huh.
And then I plan to do it that way. But I'm just so anxious to get out there and start doing work and stuff like that. And there's half the people doing solar out here have no certificates, no nothing. They just job everything out.
Yeah.
One of them is Tesla. They job everything out.
Well, I
That was
think
a joke.
you're expressing, I think the same thing that clearly everybody's feeling as far as this, especially now that it's spring, everybody wants to get out and be active again. We're seeing people contacting us constantly about wanting to come on tours and wanting to do all of these things. And we say, we're still not open for business until things clear up. And I'm afraid the number of people getting vaccinated, is starting to make people feel like it's a done deal, like everything's finished. And I think we're in that kind of limbo where maybe they're right, maybe it is over and now it's just going to fade away, or maybe it's not. So I don't know what the solution is there. We just kind of, but we do know that people are pushing. I personally think we're going to be going into a manic phase as a society as soon as the restrictions are lifted.
It's already predicted. And so after the Spanish flu, we went into the roaring 20s.
Yeah.
After World War II, I watched my father's generation party hardy for, everybody had a bar in the basement and everybody was dancing. I mean, so I expect that, but I got this thing called the African strain of COVID-19, which the vaccines are not working against in any way whatsoever.
Well, let's keep
one
our...
in this group who got vaccinated?
Okay, so anyway, I want to go industrial.
Okay, well, I think
I want to go industrial.
Okay, well, I think Siggy just asked if he's the only one who hasn't been vaccinated. Is that what you just asked?
I have been vaccinated.
You have been? I don't know. How many folks have not been vaccinated yet? Really? About half have not. Well, I assumed Ryan wouldn't have been. He's much too young, right? So, well, I got my vaccination, so I'm cool. So I will tell you, however, both Annie and I got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the one shot, and both of us suffered several days of flu-like symptoms, so It's interesting that they told us, they downplay it, but I mean, it's not horrible, but it's like getting the regular flu for a couple of days.
That's very reassuring that you got a full take. So I'd be happy about that.
Yeah, well, that's what I was figuring, because I told my friend that, and he had already gotten a shot, and he's going, I must have just got water because I got nothing, I didn't, but I was bragging to Annie that getting the shot, it was like so painless, and it hurt more taking the Band-Aid off than getting the shot. And I'm strutting around and then like 24 hours later, I'm like, oh man, I feel like crap. And my knees hurt so bad. I couldn't walk. It was like, I've never had something where both of my knees just sort of, it was the weirdest reaction. So anyway, that's all done now.
Is there any chance that you and she had been exposed and maybe had a subclinical case?
Yes, very, very much so, because we had an intern who showed up in February of last year, who then decided to collapse on our couch and be deathly ill for about a week. And we nursed him back to health. And he had just come from Chinatown in Toronto and had, we think, been exposed to the virus there, and decided, and both of us, we didn't really have symptoms, although for sure my wife experienced a lot of, foggy mental acuity, which I'm going to be very careful as to how I react to that. but I would say it was more than normal.
The knees, I'm sort of doing a medical consult without proper data, but the fact that you had a arthritis reaction at your knees tells me you already had antibodies on board, and you just have gone through a classic process that probably means that you already had developed some immunity.
Oh, that's interesting. Because Annie complained that her hand and her ankles were so, the joints were so painful. And for both of us, that was the worst symptom. So that's interesting to hear.
Tell your primary doctor about that, and tell them that you got this, person whose last internal medicine was 40 plus years ago.
Well,
I just said this to you.
First, I'll have to get a primary doctor, because I actually haven't been to a doctor since I was 13. So I'll need to.
This is not. You have other good reasons to establish with one, but not this.
I don't know. I figure
sounds like you're healthy.
Yeah, well, that's my plan. As my grandmother always used to say, people die in hospitals, so we're going to avoid that. So anyway, okay, so I wanted to bring up, and I hadn't heard of this company. Maybe I'm late to it, but I heard an interesting podcast, and I just thought I'd bring up the idea. We've all heard of Tesla, but there's another company out there called Nikola, that's using the same spirit guide or whatever. So we've got now Nikola and Tesla. And Nikola is focusing on largely on green hydrogen. And this is one of those renewable technologies that I personally am very, very skeptical of. Hydrogen in and of itself has been problematic in my mind, but wondered if anybody had heard. I saw Siggy shaking his head that he's at least heard of Nikola, but I think there may be a couple of underlying fundamentals that are changing that might make hydrogen actually practical in some applications. And I just wondered if anybody had any thoughts on it, or if you've given any thought to the whole hydrogen economy, which seems to come around periodically, and everybody's saying in 20 years it's going to be huge. And 20 years later, they're saying in 20 years it's going to be huge. And now we're saying in 20 years it's going to be huge. So is it going to be huge?
It's always the next upcoming thing.
Yeah, I always say it's the technology of the future and always has been, so.
It always will be, is the line about fusion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Well,
the rule for hydrogen, Jay, is that first Jay ignores it, then he ridicules it, and then he accepts it.
right, and
It's,
then
it's gonna
and-
be
and
Jay.
then it
I think it's
wins.
gonna be heavy industry, shipping. You already see hydrogen fueling at major ports. So ocean liners, things like that. There's a big application for aviation, and Toyota is developing a lot. I mean, there's dozens of companies developing it, but
Yeah, well, I know
Well,
Toyota has the Mirage, I think it's called, that's a passenger vehicle, and I think that's kind of foolish. That I don't think that's an application for it. But I suspect you're right, Brian. When we talk about heavy industry, that's kind of where the future is. We're already seeing it in forklifts. That's a big deal, and according to Amazon and Microsoft, there's like an 18-month payback on hydrogen forklifts. So that's pretty impressive. But anybody else have any?
I was reading Wikipedia about the Toyota Mirai. It's called
Uh-huh.
almost a Mirage. There's like 35 fueling stations. They're all in California.
Yeah.
So, and I see them fairly frequently on the road. Kind of like how, if you remember when hybrids first started rolling out, you see one every so often, like, oh, hey, there's one of those weird fish cars. It's like that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
but only Californians, I imagine, will own one.
Well, there is a 5-minute video of Elon Musk on YouTube where he responds to a question regarding individual passenger cars and hydrogen, and I side with Elon Musk on that one. So he kind of says he stated that it's kind of a dumb thing, and it'll reveal itself that his battery operated vehicles will succeed compared to the hydrogen passenger car. Well, there will. I personally think there will be application for, like you said, ocean liners and possible aviation, maybe. But individual passenger cars, I can't. The efficiency is just not there.
Yeah.
I mean,
I can contest to one thing. I work with nitrogen in the electronics industry all the time. We do soldering in the nitrogen environment. And we would buy bottles and bottles of nitrogen, and you just let it 3 or 4 days, there's nothing left in the bottle.
Right.
Nitrogen just evaporates with the tiniest crack. So whatever they put a tank on a ship or a car or whatever, they got to keep filling that thing up almost on a daily basis, or you leave it sit there for a few days, you're not going to have anything left in there.
Yeah, that's been one of the problems. Of course, hydrogen's even worse than nitrogen in that it's the smallest atom. And one of the issues has always been storage, because it will go through even solid metal. It will leak through.
Yeah.
So it's got to be cryogenically frozen and put under pressure. Then, of course, there's transportation of hydrogen. So what has traditionally happened is you get the creation of hydrogen in the motor itself, and it's always presented to us through a hydrolysis sort of scenario where they say, well, you take water, you separate the oxygen from the hydrogen, you've got hydrogen, the only pollutant is oxygen. But the reality is almost every bit of hydrogen that's used is from methane. And so it is a fossil fuel. Now, one of the attractions of fuel cells is that the companies that are behind it, who have traditionally been fossil fuel companies, they want to continue to own the fuel. And you can own the fuel. You can own the hydrogen. It's a process similar to oil and oil refinery and all of that stuff. So that profit model, that infrastructure is in place. So they're laying over top of that now the concept of green hydrogen. And of course, green hydrogen is hydrogen that's created through electrolysis that comes from solar and wind, as opposed to using fossil fuels. So that's much more appealing to the greenies out there, more so than, say, taking natural gas. and refining it, taking the hydrogen out. Because of course the waste product with natural gas, when you do that, is CO2, which is a greenhouse gas. And it's not solving anything, in fact. And the other problem with hydrolysis has been that the energy that you get from the hydrogen is usually less than the energy it takes to do the hydrolysis. So those have been all of the underlying factors that have led me and Elon Musk and other folks to say hydrogen is dumb. Hydrogen is a dumb idea. Why not just make a better battery? And that's where my mind has been. But what I've been hearing here tends to kind of make me think that might be changing. And the reason it's changing is because we're seeing so much solar and so much wind being put out there and deployed into the grid that we're beginning to see a lot of curtailment of that resource in dealing with load demand fluctuation. So if you've got a big solar array or a big wind farm and it's not producing because there is no load demand, it's sort of like your Bitcoin thing. Let's use it for something. So now you've got a free resource that can be used to be making the hydrogen. So it really doesn't matter what the cost is of the electrolysis, because the alternative is the same. Either you use it or you don't use it. But now that hydrogen can be stored energy. And when you get into large transportation, let's say we've got something like a diesel fleet. Let's use our semi trucks going across the interstate. Well, even if their battery can go, 200 miles, well, first off, it would add a huge amount of weight to their vehicle to get a battery that could go 200 miles. So that's going to put wear and tear on the roadway system. They're going to have range limit regardless. So wouldn't it be better if they can just simply fill up with hydrogen, use that onboard fuel cell to go forward, and then you don't have to have an infrastructure system that spans every single gas station. You just have interstate truck stops that have hydrogen available. So the infrastructure for meeting that demand is a lot less strenuous than trying to meet the demand of hydrogen vehicles at the passenger car level. And the same thing applies to, cruisers and the like. So this gives you a range. It gets rid of that range situation. But I'm not convinced 100% yet that there isn't a better alternative than fuel cells, for using that extra power that's sitting there available and for dealing with that range anxiety. So that's kind of where my head's at. I was just wondering if anybody had feedback on it.
It kind of seems like an 8-track sort of intermediary tech on the way over to better, energy storage, like a ion storage.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is
Now
that concept of Metalhydrides, like they have talked about with fuel cells, where the vehicle itself could be created out of a storage system for hydrogen, and then you just infuse it. Think of it like almost like a metal sponge, where you fill that metal full of hydrogen and then suck it out. So that's a possibility, but it still doesn't get rid of the storage issue with hydrogen. Because hydrogen, like Bob's pointing out, it leaks. It goes away. And if we're starting to create a imbalance of hydrogen out there that's leaking into the atmosphere, what kind of long-term impact is that going to have? On our, is it the next greenhouse gas, so to speak? Where, I don't know, does hydrogen just recombine with oxygen and create water vapor? And so will we create a permanent fog, across the globe if we do that? And
it just goes into space.
It just goes
into space.
Well, then
it's
aren't
really
we
rare on terrestrial planet.
Yeah, well, then
That's
aren't we
what
just
happened to Mars.
siphoning off all of the resources of Earth over time? Now we're gonna, Tim.
I think the narrative has been narrowed too much when you're thinking about fossil fuels or hydrogen. Is that the next step is going to be anti-gravity, to be able to manipulate gravity in order to move vehicles. And
Yeah,
I don't think that's all that far off, to tell the truth.
you're talking about magnetic levitation, maglev transportation. That's very
A
much.
little bit more than that is basically bending space and being able to manipulate
Okay.
gravity. We don't even know what gravity is.
I'm happy to go there, Tim, but I don't know that you're going to get funding for that.
Well, if you take a drive to Area 51, you'll probably find out.
I've been working on a theory. Did you know
Buy the anti-gravity belt.
Yeah.
Do you know if you take water and heat it up, this vapor comes off of it?
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what to do with that vapor and turn that into energy somehow.
Well, I think that's called steam, and that was happened back when Watt, refined the steam engine. I think we're pretty good there. But the maglev, I think, is definitely an issue. I mean, that's an option that's being used in railways for sure already. Another thing that I've been thinking about, since we're getting into futuristic here, is thinking about redefining mass transportation and thinking in terms of driverless vehicles that are fully electric, that are recharged in wireless parking spaces. So what would happen in an urban environment if simply you wanted to go from A to B, you just simply plug it into your phone, a driverless vehicle shows up, your phone is the access into the vehicle, and then it will take you along a route where it may or may not pick up somebody else. But then this becomes basically a fully electric, unmanned distribution system, sort of like Uber without the drivers and without the gasoline. I just tend to feel like people, especially Americans, don't like mass transit because it's too limiting. It only takes you from where it starts to where it ends instead of where you start to where you end. And I think that solution might end up being the best. Of course, my wife Annie thinks that's horrible and resource wasteful, and people should conform their behavior for the greater social good. And that may be true, but I don't think that they will. So I don't know. Anybody think I'm full of crap on that?
No, in fact, the aviation industry right now, for the last 20, 30 years, is getting away from the big jumbo jets and stuff and the confines of that, and going to 8 to 12 passenger, going from point to point on demand. Not the cost is a little high, but it's coming down. So there's deviations into that type of travel too.
Jay, you had a comment there?
It's taking us a slightly different direction. If you're talking about the future, I think this is pasteuristic, not futuristic. But I got a ride in what I think was the Chrysler turbine car, probably in the 60s, because a friend of my folks had one that whoever made the thing wanted people in the community to use it for 3 months or 6 months or something. But was that turbine car hydrogen fueled?
Turbine car. I'm not familiar with it. Anybody?
Leno has two of them, and it's a pure jet. I mean, there's no two ways about it. You're using the alcohol or
kerosene.
Well, was it Chrysler that made that thing?
yeah.
Okay.
And
I was probably junior high school.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of in line with what I was just talking about, but I really believe that the future of vehicle charging is going to be wireless, and it's going to be incorporated into parking spaces. So, so this is something I know, Tim, you work in municipal parking. It's interesting. I just heard a podcast with some really smart folks, and they were saying, if you were given $1 billion, what would you invest it in? And this guy said, I would buy parking garages and fit every space with electric vehicle chargers and become a municipal based battery storage system and sell all of that excess power back to the grid, and I just thought, well, that's an option, but I think
So that'd be a good option in Columbus.
yeah,
Because
for
Columbus
sure.
has a municipal city electric company.
Yeah, and when
So
you talk
could,
about
negotiate something that with the city, and you could power all the buildings downtown too.
well, and that
Actually,
really
that's a very good idea.
it really feeds into the fact that in a municipal setting like that, for them, their peak load demand is going to be about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So if they could curtail some of their transmission, especially in the hot summer, you would find that you could sell that excess power. I mean, just look at what Texas paid. They were paying what, $6,000 a kilowatt hour for short-term supply, but you could, 9,000. Yeah. So you could find certainly getting $2, $3 a kilowatt hour for power that's being sold during those little minor peaks. You could provide free parking. Yeah.
I have
Could you
2 comments. A lot of EV owners are actually concerned about diminishing the life of the battery through more charge cycles, discharge cycles by selling power back to the grid. That's one comment. And then maybe, I think Tesla has spoken about a 1,000,000-mile battery. That's one comment. Another comment, I do have a friend who purchased a company that does inductive charging. And the idea is that when we have driverless vehicles, there will not be an operator to plug the electric autonomous vehicle into a charging apparatus. So you just drive the vehicle above the inductive charger and bam, you're done.
Right.
So, that's possibly a good move, looking forward.
Yeah, I view those as probably just simply parking spaces, that you would the vehicle would return to a parking space and then it would inductively charge in that spot rather than trying to say, okay, we're going to put a line of inductive charging along all the roadways or whatever, which seems pretty impractical.
Right. No, this is, these are ones not moving stationary inductive chargers.
Yeah. As far as the charging and discharging issue, I know that's a big problem. There is a standard that's being developed that addresses that or, deals with the vehicle to grid or vehicle to home situation that the automakers are supposed to be involved in. So hopefully that will sort of be baked into the cake, of the assumption that it will be something that will happen when you buy a new vehicle. We'll see. But in theory, it's something that can certainly work. In practice, I'm sure there's 100,000 problems that have to be overcome. But I think it's cool.
I'm trying to figure out if I understand you're going to have the parking people there with the chargers, and you could you fill up their batteries and you draw back down on them. But if I'm decide to leave at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or maybe 3 o'clock after you've drawn down on my battery, I mean, I'm not sure. Are people just agreeing to say, okay, I'm plugging in, but I might have more or less than I charged than I started with?
Yeah, typically what you would do is you would agree to that, as a function of that I'm getting free power, but there would be limitations to how much you could have it drawn down. So, it might say that we're never going to draw you down below 95% of your battery's state of charge or 90%, at which point you're not going to be left without gas. But the collective 10% is quite a lot of power, and that's, or you might even agree to say, all right, well, if I'm willing to have it drawn down even further, I can profit share in this, and get a certain portion of the power from it. There's any number of options there. So who knows? I think what we're moving towards conceptually is more and more transportation will simply be an app on your phone. For a lot of the urban world, if I need to get from one place to another, I simply have an app for that. And I punch a button and a vehicle of some sort shows up, takes me where I'm going, and then I'm done. I don't
And you
need.
don't have any concerns about driverless vehicles, making,
I have more
you
concerns
know,
about drivers in vehicles.
okay.
So, but it's not very practical for the rural, those of us who live outside of the urban environment. So that's going to be problematic, for us. We're always left behind, in these technological leaps. And then you talk about, well, does this mean a lot more vehicles on the road, a lot more congestion, a lot more whatever? Who knows? Maybe there are we have situations where you're not allowed to drive into the city center on certain days, like in London, for instance. Maybe it becomes the norm where highly urbanized environments, you simply cannot drive your vehicle into them. You drive to a perimeter parking space and then get onto the network.
That's already the case in my hometown
Oh, which is
in
that?
Germany.
Oh, in Germany?
Dortmund, Germany. Not only Dortmund, there's all the towns, all the cities in Germany already have that standard. If you don't have the latest and greatest environmental standard placard on your windshield, you will have to stop your car. You can't drive into inner city areas. And they have a red zone, a green zone, a yellow zone. So if you have a yellow sticker, you can go in the yellow zone. It's typical German. It's completely regulated.
Yeah.
So
Well,
basically, what it is, you have a car that's 8 or 10 years old, and you can't really drive it where you want.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Do
I
you
think
the system works?
Hmm?
Do you think it works?
In Germany, it works, but in the United States, it wouldn't.
yeah, I think that's
even in Germany nowadays, they just showed protesters yesterday with COVID stuff. So I think they're getting less likely to be just fall in line like they have for years.
Yeah, I almost am joking now. I think the Germans are looking for freedom in North Korea, so they have the toughest regulation on COVID. You can only go here and there between 1 and 3, and you can't go there.
Yep.
And don't meet more than one friend, but only if it's from another household. And I don't know, they have all these regulations. No one can keep up with that.
Yeah. I remember when we lived in France, they just started recycling when we were there. And so they then wanted you to sort your garbage in a certain specific way. And then they sent out people to go through everybody's garbage and then bang on their door and inform them of everything they did wrong. So we get these like little garbage police coming to the door saying, you put this thing over here when it should have been over there. And we're just looking at them going, really? This is how you're spending your money? So.
Yeah, the latest state election in Germany, the Green Party had the most percentage, the most vote.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Well,
which is a good thing, but yeah.
I think we find that Europe, of course, and Germany, like specifically, is much more accepting and attuned to regulation than perhaps the American society has been. And as a result, they've been early adopters in a lot of these technologies and doing it at a time when it's not really economically advantageous to them, but it's certainly economically advantageous to us to come in 6 or 7 years later and say, oh, you guys sorted out all the problems. Well, that's great. Now I think we'll start dealing with offshore wind now that you've got the price down from 30 cents a kilowatt hour down to 8 cents, and, oh, you figured out how to do autonomous vehicles, that's cool. We can do that, So in many respects, as much as I like to criticize our government, it's probably not wise to be the first adopter in a lot of this stuff. It's usually smarter to come along later and say, you know what, that seems to be working, or man, you guys lost your shirt on that. You were pretty foolish. So, yeah, Bob, you had a comment there?
I have a comment.
Okay, go ahead, Tim.
So in Germany, is there a payback? Can you get a payback from the from your excess electricity that you produce? I mean, because I think that would really move a lot of people into renewable solar.
In Germany in the year, it must have been starting right around the year 2001 or so. Not sure exactly. They had the Social Democratic Party in power together with the Green Party, and they passed a law that was a feed-in tariff, and that feed-in tariff was really attractive. It was like $1 a kilowatt hour. So, and that was gradually reduced over a decade. Now they have arrived at a point where the feed-in tariff is not attractive anymore because its rate is lower than feed-in rate is lower than the retail. Now they're shifting to storage and net metering in Germany.
I think
How does
that
affect,
policy,
how does that affect one that's producing it, like a homeowner? I mean, so at one time, homeowners were receiving checks?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
You would put 10 kilowatt on your property. There were actually businesses driving around looking for farms and barns and roofs and saying, that's an attractive roof. I'm going to lease it, put 100 kilowatt on there, and I'm going to feed it back in the grid. That's what they did for about 10 years. But then, until they reached a certain point where the industry was mature enough, the government started reducing those feed-in tariffs. So
Yeah.
today it's not a business anymore to feed in.
it was really a smart tactic where they said, okay, we need a lot of generating capacity rather than pay for it ourselves because, it's a nationalized grid. Rather than going out and building all these power plants, we will incentivize people to build the infrastructure themselves. And then once we have the capacity that we need, we'll gradually phase it out. And I thought that was a very clever plan, really from the get-go. A lot of the anti-renewable people were saying, look at the high cost of energy in Germany. This proves that renewables don't work. But the fact was that the German people themselves were the beneficiary of the high cost of the energy. So there wasn't the kind of pushback that you might expect from having very high power costs, because there were a lot of individual investors who were benefiting from it. So that tend to blunt that criticism a bit. Although I think Germany still has much higher power costs than we would experience. Is that not true, Siggy?
It is at the kilowatt hour is, I think it's about 22 cents, 25 cents maybe, depending. But they have a liberalized power generation system where my friend lives in Münster in the north, and he buys his power from Munich in the south. It's electrical power because they separated generation from transmission, so he can pick whoever generates and buys it from anywhere. So he switches his utility every 12 months because they always have certain deals out there. So that's one aspect of that. So over here is monopolized. Where can I buy from? Tico, and where else? Yeah, well, from my roof. That's about it.
Right.
I'm wondering if that had did that have any effect to where that's why nuclear energy was phased out? I mean, is it assisting in the cleanup of the sites, the nuclear sites and all that? I mean, is that all tied in as one energy policy? Because that's something that's missing here in America. We really don't have an energy policy.
The fade out of the nuclear wasn't really such a heroic green act. It really was a turnaround reaction to the Fukushima accident. Angela Merkel was chancellor at the time, and they actually, ironically, like a month before that Fukushima happened, they actually passed a law to prolong nuclear power for another 20 years. And I swear, like 4 weeks later, that thing blew up, and they turn around on their heel and cancel it. And the power industry, they sued the German government over that. I think they're still suing them over breach of contract.
Well, I think too, in Germany, a lot of it was a reaction to the escalating cost of coal, because they were pretty dependent on coal as a resource for their electrical grid. And it was interesting because when I was doing research on a book, I found, that the reserves of these energy sources like oil and coal are self-reported by governments. And if you look at the energy reserves or how much coal is in the ground in Germany, it was like from 1990, and I'm just making up numbers, but it was like 600 billion metric tons or something of coal is in the ground. Then 91, it was 600 billion metric tons, and 92 the same, and 93 the same. And there was no accounting for any depletion of the stock, even though they were using it. So it went 600, 600, 600, 0. it was like they suddenly had no coal, because all of their reporting was just paperwork. It was falsified. So they were a complete importer of coal and natural gas. I know famously they've relied on Russian natural gas, and I think this was seen as a energy independence issue as much as anything, and should be in almost any nation because it is very localized in nature. So, so I think it's interesting too. I've been listening to this podcast called The Energy Gang, and these guys are great. If you ever want to hear about like macro policy on the grid, it's called The Energy Gang. And I've been kind of binge listening because going back a year, hearing all their predictions from COVID and everything. And these guys are really fascinating. And one of the fellas who's just actually been named as like one of the assistant Department of Energy, Secretary of Energy guys under the Biden administration, he was taking the attitude, he keeps saying, we as an industry come from a position of weakness. We need to tell these fossil fuel guys, listen, you've already lost. If you want to be part of the game, here's what you need to do. Otherwise, we're going to be putting you out of business in the next 10 years. And that is just the plain and simple fact. BP has already announced they're getting out of the oil business. Exxon announced losses for the first time in their history. All of the natural gas is being sold at a loss. I mean, the fossil fuel people are just hemorrhaging money. And then you get these guys like BlackRock who come out and say, okay, we manage $7 trillion. We're not investing in fossil fuel anymore at all. I mean, this industry, we're at such an amazing watershed period where the age of fossil fuels is absolutely over. Doesn't mean it's going away, just means it will no longer be calling the shots. And we need to figure out how to transfer. Pardon?
Yesterday, I was looking up ExxonMobil's stock price, and it's over the past 5 years, it's like impressively horrifying. I mean, for them, So.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're just hemorrhaging money. It's amazing to me that in the mainstream media, we have not come to realize that all of these businesses are, on the brink of extinction or certainly morphing into something different. BP is trying to morph into a renewable energy industry, into a renewable energy business. And the question is, can they do it effectively? Can they do it efficiently? Historically, people have not been able to make those transitions, but we'll see. But so it's fun. We're in the middle of something that's huge, and it'll be fascinating to see. Yeah, Tim just posted the link on that Energy Gang. Yep.
Do you think that the reactionary government in Poland and maybe Hungary also is because they have huge coal reserves and they're watching their they're watching their resource get clobbered and want to stop it?
I don't know enough about it to really comment. I know a lot of people try and cling on to the past. I guess one of the things I don't quite understand is at the moment with the price of oil, when you produce oil, you're producing it at a loss. So why are they still producing it? That's the thing I don't get. The oil's still going to be in the ground, whether you pump it or not. Why would you pump it out when the price is so low that you're not going to make any money? Why wouldn't you just hold it in reserve? Because I just have a feeling with oil and natural gas, in a few years, people are going to be going, can you believe we used to burn this stuff? This stuff is too valuable to be just burned. This stuff is used in chemical processes. It's used in industrial processes. Why do we just burn it for heat? I mean, that is crazy. There's some. Yeah.
Sort of like helium for party balloons.
Yeah. Yeah. You just say, okay, there's an industry here that's a lot more profitable, on a smaller scale, but it is more profitable. So I think that's what we're going to see. It's going to change changed dramatically. So, all right. Well, I think we're at the end of the time. Anybody have wisdom to close us out with, or do we fade off into that sea of ignorance we call our society? So, all right.
I'll call you later, Jake.
Okay. See y'all next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.